I'm Seb.
And I'm Jesse, and welcome to the Sinners But Safe podcast.
And today we have Jesse's Pastor Ben on the podcast with us.
So pumped.
I'm so excited for
good.
this episode.
Yeah, so excited. It's so good to have you, Ben, on the podcast. We're so glad. And we're so ready to hear your story and how you came to know Jesus. But how's your day been today?
It's been awesome, boys. It's an absolute honour to be here on the podcast with you guys. I've been listening along and just hearing some incredible insights from you both. And I just got to say from the outset, I'm inspired by you guys.
Thank you.
And your incredible faith in God and the way that you just live that out every day. But I've had a great day. So,
good.
But even better now that I'm here for the podcast. so good.
That's so good. Well, today we're going to be speaking about aspects of hope and also faith. Connected to your testimony. But the first question we have for you is, throughout your testimony and getting to know Jesus, how have you seen how your faith in him has kept you going, basically?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, my story is I grew up in a Christian family, but my mum passed away from cancer when I was 11 years old. It kind of led to a spiral in our family where my dad had a gambling addiction through kind of my teenage years. But he overcame that, and we really got back into church, got connected to God again as a family, and which was so cool to see. But then he got remarried, and life was doing really well. Anyway, went overseas to the Philippines with his amazing new wife, and over there was in an accident, and he died suddenly when I was 18 years old. And so all of those kind of like chains of events were dramatic and kind of crazy in their own right. But through it all, the constant has been God. Like I've always felt like I could put trust in him, felt like his presence was there, felt like the church was strong during that time, and there was so many amazing people that supported us and looked after us as well. And so for me, it's been a journey of not always with faith, the circumstances being ideal, but always knowing God has been present.
That's so cool.
I think that's an important thing about faith, because we think faith's just going to be, oh, well, life's great and it just gets better and better and better all the time. Sometimes faith takes us through some really dark times, but faith is actually just trust. It's trusting God.
That's so good.
Not just the circumstances. And so that's been my story.
Yeah.
Just learning to trust God no matter what the season is, in the good times and the bad.
Yeah, wow. That's so cool. Yeah, I think one thing with faith and also connected to that God's been showing me lately is, if you look at disciples and even your story, we all have faith to get to that, like, that ending, to like that part where it's like everything is good in life. But we all have that thing we long for. Yeah. But with like even the disciples, they had faith in that. But having the process, like the process of having faith in every single decision before that is so important. Like it says in the Bible that the narrow gate is the gate you choose, but it doesn't all of a sudden turn open when you walk into it. It's a narrow gate every single day to choose God and keep stepping in faith with that. Yeah, and it's so cool to see how in your life, you had your goals and you had that plan, and there was definitely times where it would have been shifted and pushed around, but even in those processes you still had the faith. It wasn't just to get there, it was also in every single decision on the way to that outcome as well. Yeah,
and I think it's a journey. Like faith is not something that we just don't have faith in faith. Our faith is in God. It's trust in him. And I think our seasons and our circumstances change dramatically in life, but the constants of God's love and his peace and the hope that we have in him, that's always there. And I think we've got to be careful that we don't just chase just living this dream idealistic life all the time, but just keep putting our trust in God. I think that's the important thing. I mean, look at the disciples. They trusted Jesus, they chose to follow him, but they didn't know where that was going to end up. That led them to a whole bunch of pain and crazy seasons in life, and some of the best times and some of the worst for them. They had the ups and downs, but they learned to trust God. And I think sometimes going through pain actually teaches us to trust God and helps us to kind of get to know an aspect of God that we don't know sometimes just through the good times as well.
Yeah, that's so good.
I was kind of thinking, like, a lot of people, after they lose someone or like go through like a trial like that, they become really bitter towards God and stuff like that. But in that sense, after like your mum and dad passed away, like what was your perspective on God, and like how did you stay strong in your faith?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a great question. I don't think it was like always like, oh, gee, I feel great and I really feel like reading my Bible and praying today and I feel like trusting God. There was definitely some dark days and some moments where I just questioned, God, why would you let this happen? I don't understand it. It was like the wind was knocked out of me, and you're just trying to get your bearings again. And so there's definitely some moments there. But I think what I saw during those times is, even when I was like, oh, God, where are you in this? I don't understand this. I always found that God's church and his people were always so strong during that time in loving us, in looking after us, in caring for us in real practical ways. It was kind of impossible to deny that God wasn't still working through people and supporting us and working in those situations, even when it felt like, I feel like he's distant and I don't understand it. It was still like, well, but I can see evidence of God working through the people around us.
That's so cool.
And I love that about God, that it's like he chooses to use us. He chooses to work through people to encourage one another and care for people. And sometimes we can look at a crisis and just think, I don't understand it. But when we start to see all of God's answers in it, like, you see a tragedy, but you see an ambulance on the way there, or a police officer on the way there, or different things that are on the way to help and support, and you're like, it was kind of like that, like the church was like that in those moments. They were offering support, coming to us, caring for us at a time where it's just like, you're trying to get your bearings and it felt like a crisis, but God was in all of those things as well. And I love that about God, but I think it's one of those things that was just a step by step, and then more and more you just felt more comfortable to open the Bible or pray. And I think in all of it, I still, even though I was confused and unsure, I still was like, I know God's there.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's hard to remember God is there sometimes as well. Like, even look at Matthew, when he was walking, Simon Peter, when he was walking on water.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus was in front of him and he still forgot that he was there, and he still ended up, like, he started drowning as well. And how many times do we go through situations where we're like, oh, what is happening? And we're starting to drown and we don't even remember that God is with us 24/7. I think we were speaking about it recently, and it was how God only came when he actually called for him as well. Like, we have to call for God in those situations. But it was as soon as he saw the waves and the wind that he actually fell and started drowning as well. I think sometimes with faith, it's that constant reminder that God is there. It's that constant reminder to step into what God has for us. And even if there is wind, and even if there is waves that are troubling us and moving us around, the longer we have our faith and the more we have our faith in God, the quicker we'll get closer to him, and then we can be walking on water for him in our faith. And it's so cool. It's definitely easier said than done, but it's so cool to see when we do have that faith, how he works. Yeah.
And as well, as soon as he starts thinking and he cries out to Jesus, it says immediately Jesus reached out his hand and picked him back out of the water. So it's not.
It's good, Seb.
It's not like when we call from him, he'll make us wait, but he'll immediately take us out of the trouble that we're in.
Yeah. It's so good.
I kind of like that doubt is a part of that journey of faith as well. Like, we're all trying to grow, and I find that story encouraging about Peter. that he stepped out, walked on the water. But then he began to sink as well, because it reminds me that we all at times fail, we all at times can doubt and go through things, and that's part of our journey of faith, of just learning to trust God and to grow in God in every single season. I think if he just got up and just did this catwalk on the water and was like, everything was all perfect, we'd be like, oh gee, like, why can't my life be like that? But I love that he kind of had those moments as well, and as you said, Seb, in his weak moments, Jesus was straight there to help him out when he needed and when he called out to God, and it's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah, I think it's also a reality check that we can't do it without him. Yeah. And if we're constantly trying to do our decision, it's more having faith in our own capabilities and not having faith in what God can do in situations. There's always that verse, I don't remember where it is, but it's about leaning on God, not your own understanding, and he'll make your path straight.
Yeah.
But if we're always doing our way, that's when our path goes a little bit wonky and a bit out there sometimes. I think it's a real reminder of that story, that with faith, it comes only through God and not through anything else, and not through our own abilities. But yeah.
That's really good. I love that.
Yeah. But another question I have for your testimony is, how did the opportunity to become a pastor actually come through your faith?
Yeah, well, so I was part of our local church and local youth ministry in a town called Singleton in the Hunter Valley. And so I grew up there, and I was just serving in those areas. And then I remember one day our senior pastor saying to me, have you ever thought about doing ministry or being a pastor or anything like that before? And in my heart, like, I was like, yes, I would love to do that. But I was so kind of insecure and shy about it, and I didn't want to be like, make a big deal about it. I was like, I kind of like denied it. I was like, oh no, I haven't really thought about that. Even though I was like, oh, that would be a dream to do that. So I kind of brushed it off the first time that it ever kind of got mentioned to me. But anyway, that conversation come back up again at another point, and I was like, actually, yeah, I would really love to do that, and I'd love to do that with my life and do Bible college and go through those things. And thankfully, the opportunity came up for that. I finished high school and had the opportunity to do essentially like an internship at church and did Bible college and got trained up to take on the leadership of our youth ministry in time and do some chaplaincy stuff in school. And so that was kind of like the start for me to get involved, and loved it, absolutely loved it.
That's so good.
That's too
Yeah,
good.
wow. Yeah, it's crazy. I feel like there's so many times where it's like that faith thing is, sometimes we can feel so ashamed of it as well.
Yeah.
Like I remember with the podcast for a while, like I didn't really want to talk to many people about it, because I was like, yeah, like I'm doing it and it's cool, and like I would happily speak to about it with like my Christian friends.
Yeah.
But then my unchristian friends was like, I don't know if they're gonna like everything we say and stuff. I don't want them to have like a weird thought of me. But to see now how many people it's reached and how it continues to reach people is such a blessing. And I feel like only God can do that. And God's shown me that how we shouldn't limit God through what he thinks he's going to do and how it might affect us. But if we actually let God have all the room, that's when he can actually work. And that's so sick. Yeah.
And I love that about you guys with this podcast. You haven't waited until like, let's wait till I'm older, or let's wait till I've got more information, or wait till I feel like I'm more ready for this. You've gone, you know what, we're going to give this a go in our current life where we are right now as high school students, facing, the realities of, day-to-day school, figuring out life, figuring out faith. We're going to speak up on this stuff now. I reckon that's awesome.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people wait and they're, I've got to be wise, I've got to do this. We're all on a journey. We're never going to get to that point where we completely graduate and like, I'm good enough. And to me, it's like similar to the story of Peter. He stepped out onto that water not knowing what was going to happen. And I think that's a part of faith. It's being obedient to what God's calling us to do right now, knowing, hey, I don't have all the skills and ability, all the wisdom to do this, but I'm trusting you, God, anyway, that you plus God equals everything you need.
Yeah, that's so good.
And I think sometimes we just feel inadequate, but we've just got to trust God with it.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I think as well when we miss like opportunities from God, I feel like we can really get like convicted as well. Like if you feel God is calling you into something, and then you're like, oh no, I feel like I have to wait till I'm more experienced with this thing, or like just in general, I think when we do miss that, then my own experience, I feel really convicted. I'm like, and then afterwards I'm like, oh, that would have been such an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's just in the moment leading up to that where like you have doubt and like worries if we don't rely on God to like persevere through that, then
it's true.
Yeah, I think it's like that leap of faith. I feel like when you actually trust in God, you realize that that leap of faith is not even you really taking the leap anymore. It's actually God just you leap and then he kind of like floats you down and you just like land softly and safely and stuff. But I feel like in all situations, it's like, what's going to happen and how is this going to work out? And I've had that so many times in my life with like school, like, how am I going to get past year 12, or how am I going to get the dream job or the dream university I want to get to? But if I have that leap in faith in God, and if anyone has that faith in God, and faith, like in Hebrews 11 verse 1, I think it's that one. I'll double check, but it says that it's confident hope. Like faith is confidence in hope, and I feel like when we actually have that confidence in hope, that I don't know how I'm going to get there or the way it's going to happen or why it would happen or what God has for me. But if it's his will, it will come. I don't have to worry about the way it's going to work. He's going to do it. I just step into it and it's going to come to me. And it's hard to find faith like that sometimes. I've always struggled with it. But I think just knowing that all we have to do is step into what he's called and he will just fulfill it for us is so cool.
Yeah. And I think, the word faith, when you look at it in the New Testament, and the Greek word for it is pistis, which it sounds a weird word, but it actually means trust. And I think a lot of times with faith, we are believing or dreaming for a different outcome. But faith is really trusting God and saying, God, I trust you. I trust my relationship with you. I trust that you are good. I trust that you are in control. I trust that you can do good. And the circumstances may change, they may be different to what I expect, but I'm still choosing to trust you. And I think that that's the beauty of being a disciple of Christ, that so much in our world can go wrong, so many things can change, uncertainty can happen, we can face things in this life that makes no sense, but we're not putting our trust in a certain season. And we're not just putting faith in faith, we're putting our faith and our trust in God.
Yeah.
And he never changes. He's always solid. He's always someone we can count on and rely on.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it's just crazy how, like, I feel like one way that I limited God in my life with my faith as well is like, Jesus, he calmed the storm and he walked on water, like, he's not going to be able to do stuff like me. But the same God that worked 2,000 years ago in those actions lives in us and is still working today and is still performing miracles. And I feel like with faith, you can't limit that. Because one thing that God's been speaking to me about, and I've spoken a bit on the podcast, is if you're not giving the room for Jesus to actually work in your life and not giving him all the 100% commitment in your faith, then he's not going to be able to work 100% in your life either. You actually have to open the space. You have to give him the room to actually work as well. Yeah.
I was just thinking about like an example because I spoke on Friday at youth, and leading up to it, it felt like this massive like thing. And I think I read some verse about peace. I think it's in Ephesians or Philippians, but and I was just praying like all afternoon for peace. And as it got closer, like the size of the like how big it actually felt just like diminished. Obviously it's still like important thing for me, but like the worry that came with it and like the anxiousness, I could just lay that at God's feet. And I think it's like a lot easier to like be said than done. But like as you said, like leaving room for him to work. And then actually trusting in him that he will see us through. Yeah,
that's so good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Now, I was gonna ask, like, obviously in life we all have different things that get thrown at us and many different trials we go through. And how do you think that we can keep the faith that I feel like I've seen in my own life how I'll have faith into this season like tons, and then there'll be another thing that gets thrown, another trial, and I'm like, the same faith, the same God that worked in that step of faith is still working now, but why am I struggling so much with this now? Like how do you think that we can have faith not just in one thing but in every single trial over and over and over again?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think what can happen sometimes is, we have big moments that really rock our faith, and then we can feel like we rally and we get strong, but then sometimes it's like almost like a compound concussion. Little things happen and we find ourselves just kind of like spun out and just confused and disillusioned at times as well, or discouraged. And so I think for me, it's a constant reminder that with any relationship, you're growing in trust and you're growing in your relationship that is going to help you sustain those really tough and difficult times. And so I think when it comes to our relationship with God, one of the biggest keys, which it sounds boring, but it's so important, is to be consistent in our relationship with God. Like things like reading the Bible, things like praying, things like listening to what God's speaking to us about, worshiping God, things that seem so basic for our Christian life. They are the most important thing to make sure that they are bedrocks continually focused on through the good times and the bad times, because that's what we can draw from when we're really struggling. I think that's super important that we do that. After COVID, a lot of experts did a whole bunch of research in terms of the church and looking at what actually helps create a disciple of Christ and what is the most effective way to create a disciple of Christ. And the millions of dollars on research that they spent to find out what that is, they discovered that the greatest way, the most effective way to make a disciple of Jesus is to get people to read their Bible. And it's
That's so good.
It doesn't seem like crazy spectacular, but it seems so basic. But actually, when you get into the Word of God, when you read it, it transforms you, it changes you, it shapes you, it changes the way you think and the way you respond, the way you act, the way you speak. It's one of the biggest and most effective ways that you can be transformed. And so I think we can sometimes overlook that. And I think that's important, just those basic things.
But it's so good. I think it's crazy how like the Bible, and so many people underestimate the Bible. Like, oh yeah, it's just a book, but it is honestly like so much more than that. And I saw something recently that changed my whole perspective on it. Is for a while I've always seen it as like a tutorial book for your life, but I saw something recently where it's like with Jesus, it's a relationship, and it shouldn't be the Bible shouldn't be a tutorial for your life. It should be like your messages between God, like that building of your relationship. Really, it should be such a deeper connection than just a book you read to make your life better. It should be like something that you connect to with God to actually build that relationship and to show love to Him as well. But it's crazy how just by reading your Bible, and I've seen in my own life, just by reading my Bible, it actually helps me. Like if I do it the first thing in the morning, that changes my whole day. And if I do it just before I go to bed, like it just is a good way to start on your end of day and even just make day better at any time. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. Like when you're reading, I think it's important to read it, especially like with Paul's letters. A lot of the time I read it as if it's speaking to me, because I feel like then if we're just reading it and thinking, oh no, I don't do any of this stuff, so it's fine. But it actually applies to us and how we should live.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's really good. I think it's like the Bible today is so accessible. We can get it on our phones and it's available in so many different languages. We forget that in the New Testament, when they were reading the Bible, they had to gather together and read it from a scroll on a Sunday in the temple. It wasn't like, hey, they took it, it was portable with them, and they were walking around with it. And we have it so accessible, so easy to read it whenever we want, and yet we can take it so much for granted. I'm like, we should really we should memorize and know the Bible better today than they even were in the New Testament. But unfortunately, I think sometimes we just take it for granted.
Go to church and they got the papyrus scroll and just opening it up and what verse is it today?
The original Dead Sea Scroll.
You should have preached from it on Fridays. So it would have been great.
Too good.
But actually, I was going to say something and I just forgot exactly what I was going to say.
Good question.
Something with the Bible.
That happens to me all the time, Seb, so don't worry.
Have faith it'll come back.
You say something.
I think one thing I was wondering is with faith, do you feel like obviously the Bible is super important, but do you feel like having a healthy prayer life with God is also incredibly vital with faith? Because if you go back to like Sunday school, everyone's like, read your Bible, pray, go to church on Sunday, and that's how like you have a really good life for Jesus. But I feel like it's the most easiest thing to say, but it's the hardest thing to actually apply to our lives, is even to just get to church on a Sunday, or even to just pray to God first thing in the morning. It's crazy that we actually struggle with that. But what do you think about faith and actually having a healthy prayer life and how that can help us?
Yeah, 100%. I think that praying can be one of the hardest things to do, because as you go to pray, I don't know whether you've experienced this, it can be so easy easy to be distracted.
Oh, yeah.
And so you go to pray, and then a thought comes into your mind, you get distracted, you think about something else. I find the same thing with the Bible, to be honest. Sometimes you can read the Bible, and then you can be easily distracted. And I wonder whether we get distracted, and why they are so hard is because they can be the most beneficial things.
Yeah.
I think particularly with prayer, it's one of those things that, we can be short, sharp. We can be doing all of our requests to God and putting our list to God of the things that we need. I think one of the underrated elements of prayer is also listening to God.
Yeah.
And just taking some time to say, God, what are you speaking to me about? And it's simple.
Yeah.
I think when we forget that, we can make prayer almost like a religious exercise instead of remembering it's a relationship. God's speaking to us as we're speaking to him as well. And sometimes we're like, here's my list of 20 things I've got to quickly spit it out. And we're like going through all these things that we want God to do. And then we're like, all right, I'm done. Amen.
Yeah.
And it's like God's probably at times going like, there's so much I want to say to you. Could you just like zip this for a moment and just listen to what I'm trying to say to you? I think it's remembering that it's like a two-way conversation where we can pour out our hearts to God and just be real and be honest and just talk to him like we talk to a best friend. And then remember that he wants to speak to us as well. I think it's really important, prayer, because we go through things we don't understand, and God's big enough for us to share that with him and share our heart and be honest with him. And I'm encouraged by that. When I look at the Psalms, I'm like, they are just full of stories of people that are going through the highs and lows of life, pouring out their failures and their disappointments to God, but then at the same time putting their trust in God. It's like all of those things are happening at once in the Psalms. I think it's encouraging that that's what prayer's like, just being real before God.
Yeah.
Not trying to fake it, you know?
That's so good.
I mean, he can already see our hearts. So there's like... there's nothing you could already be hiding from God, so you may as well just tell him what's on your heart.
100%.
Yeah, I think it's... I understand. Like, it's... Imagine going out for dinner with, like, God, and and all you do is just say, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. All right, see you later, I'm out.
That meme?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. It's just, I need all this stuff, I'm peace, I'm leaving. Imagine going out to someone with that, and all they do is ask things from you, and then just leave you. And then you're just like, oh, well.
It's true.
Or like when you pray for like, oh, God, give me guidance, and then you just... After the prayer, just go on your phone and just not even listen to what God might be trying to tell you.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. Like, it's different to... First thing, it's hard to pray. But then to actually pray and let alone listen to God, like you said, it's a two-way conversation. Like, when you're speaking to your friend, you don't just talk and ask all these questions and not tell them to do all this stuff and then just leave and not let them say anything. Like, it's a conversation. It's actually talking to God. It's actually having that, the friendship and relationship. And then, like, we've spoken about this so many times on the podcast that you can't become friends with a person you don't speak to. You can't become best friends with a person you don't know. And you can't love someone that you don't even have a relationship with. To actually have that relationship with God, it's like any relationship in our lives. You have to have the devotion. You have to be speaking to them. You actually have to give them the time, the commitment, the trust. And honestly, something that convicted me a lot is if you have more love for your partner or a person you're in a relationship with more than God, then you've got it all wrong. You should, the way that we have a relationship with God should reflect even less on the relationship we have in life, because God is so much greater than that. We're talking to the creator of us in the universe as well. But it's so different how we feel like, oh yeah, I want a relationship. We're already in one. We're already in a relationship with God. And that's the one that we should be working for so we can be ready for the one that he will provide to us. And I find I struggle with that so much, but it's so good to actually give God the space to actually speak to God and have that relationship with him.
I love Jesus's interactions with people in the New Testament. You know, so many times when he's interacting with people, he's actually engaging them and asking them questions. It's like, you are the savior of the world. You are Jesus. Like, why are you asking questions? We should all be asking you questions. But to me, that is showing Jesus' desire to engage with us. Like, he's asking questions. He wants conversation. He wants you to speak your heart. He wants to do that. That's how Jesus conveyed and spoke to people and had messages with people and built relationship with people. He asked questions and he was in that conversation. I mean, when I think about it, I think, man, if it's Jesus, he could just literally have just walked around everywhere just saying, I don't need to ask questions because I know all the answers. I'm just going to tell you this, tell you that, tell you this, tell you that. But he actually took the time to say, hey, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to know you. I want to hear what's going on in your heart. I reckon that speaks a lot to how God wants to have a relationship with us.
That's so good. Yeah.
And yeah, I'd hate to think that our prayer time is not like that. Like where we're just like, bang, I'm going to tell you all these things, God, then I'm out.
Yeah, I think it's so hard.
Yeah.
But it's so good when we have that relationship. Yeah.
I think if we, like, a lot of people who call themselves Christian but then don't pursue a relationship with God, I think, like, if we truly understood, like, even a droplet of the love that Jesus has for us and God has for us through dying on the cross, a sinless death, dying on the cross for us, even though we don't deserve it. I think even if we understood, like, a droplet of that, of, like, we want to desire a relationship with him so much greater.
Yeah,
that's true. That's such a good way of putting it, Seb.
Yeah, like, I mean, with faith and like the Bible and everything, like we've spoken about it before, like the Bible is the greatest love story of all, and the greatest commandment, we're speaking about it on Sunday, is love him and love everyone as your neighbor, love your enemies. And I think love is also a really incredible part of faith. Is like when you're in a relationship with your partner, you have faith in them that they're not gonna, betray you or do something behind your back. There's that trust and the commitment. You have faith that they're gonna be by your side and gonna help you out, and that you can actually have trust in that, have confidence in that, have hope in that, and not only have hope but have full faith in that. And that love we can see that in God, and it's faith that we know isn't going to let us down. We know it's not going to mess up because it's from God. And I think it's just such a reminder that faith is such an important part of love in day-to-day lives, but also in a really important part of our relationship with God. Yeah,
it's really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, to move into another question.
Yeah, for sure.
So I have so if you have been persecuted, how have you been, like, or remained strong in your faith when facing that persecution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, we are blessed in this country that we forget we have our moments of maybe persecution, as Christians, but our lives aren't at risk. We can go freely to church on a Sunday. I think it's also good to put in perspective that we are so blessed with the freedom that we have, and there are Christians and Christian brothers and sisters around the world that can't meet together, that can't profess their faith, that would literally die for their faith. I mean, that's next level persecution, right?
Yeah.
But in our own ways, we have elements of persecution here in Australia where, friends can laugh at us, friends can mock us about our faith. We see the church all the time. They can get ridiculed, around the world or in the Western world, and for the way that we do church. And there's lots of things that people pick at. And really what they're really picking at is Jesus at the end of the day. They're not picking at us. We might get hit along the way, but they're actually persecuting Jesus. And so for us, it's like, for me, I'm like, I think, well, when that happens, it's like, what's a joy to be persecuted and to be linked with Jesus, even in the midst of it. It doesn't always feel nice, and it isn't always something that we want to go through, but I think actually persecution in some ways is good for us because it reminds us that it doesn't have to be a popular message for it to be the right message. Yeah. That just because, people are going to, ridicule us or say things about us, that actually doesn't mean that my faith's any weaker. It actually reminds me that what I stand for is strong. No matter what another person's opinion of it is, my foundation is Jesus, and I'm proud to be linked with him.
That's so cool.
And I think that, that's part of being a Christian, that there will be moments to do that. I think what we have to do is be careful that we don't shrink back as Christians, but we still stay courageous and still keep sharing our faith and not be afraid of that. And I think the longer that we are a Christian, it can be easier to become comfortable in our faith and not step out and do that. Like, I'm inspired by both of you. We're going on a missions trip in Bali at the end of the year. Seb, you've got next year some big plans for missions, and that puts you in uncomfortable environments to share your faith and to do that. And I think that's inspiring because that's not the easy option. The easy option would be to like, I'm just going to go and live my quiet faith and not share it. But you both, through this podcast, through the way that you live, through just being so open about your faith, you put yourselves in positions where people ask questions, or people could mock you, or people could speak up against you. And I think that all takes faith. That's all part of just putting yourself out there and being courageous. And I think, as I said before, it's easy, the longer we go in our faith, just to get comfortable and to sit back. But I always want to be a person that is trying to endeavour to live by faith and be courageous in those things, even if there is persecution that's going to be there.
Yeah, I think with like uncomfortability, there's a piece in the faith of uncomfortability. I feel like to be uncomfortable, it can be really, like, you're not called to be comfortable, but there's a piece when you are uncomfortable because you know it's in God's hands. You know, there's that whole thing of live by faith and not by sight. If I couldn't see anything, I would be pretty uncomfortable. Like, oh, where am I? Where am I going? Like in life, like, oh, what do I do next? Like, I want to see the way. I want to do the next step. I want to know what to do next. But if you have that peace, I feel like there's a peace in not knowing what's next. Because if you know the way that everything came in your life, you're not going to step out into the next day. You probably won't even want to leave your house the rest of the day. Like, if you know how you would die and how the next day is going to be, or the trials you go through, there'll be many situations where we will really struggle and we won't want to step into that because it's hard, it's a struggle. But you can have a peace in not knowing, and you can have a peace through your faith in the uncomfortability to know that there's gonna be things that come, but God is there, God is working, God is greater. And if we live by faith and not by sight, even if there's those situations where, like, I don't know because for me, I want to know all the answers. I want to know the exact way to figure it out. And it can be a real struggle to not know because that's uncomfortable for me. But if we have that peace in the uncomfortable to know that, I'm not going to know the way to do it in this situation, but God does. And God's with me. God is there for me. God is always helping me. That's the most greatest thing. That's the coolest thing. And it's just so cool. But
I think a lot of the time it's the what if that's actually greater than the uncomfortability or like the persecution itself. Like,
definitely.
What if this person says this thing? What if I'm uncomfortable in this situation? And then you actually go and do it, and it's not nearly as bad as you thought it would be. And the worrying and anxiety that leads up to it is actually like far worse than the result of what actually happens.
It's true. I remember in high school, we did this thing called Exo Day. And I did it in my local high school, and it was a Youth Live initiative. And the whole idea behind the day was to share that life is excellent with Jesus. And I was maybe in year 8 or 9 at school at the time, and I went to try and do this day at our school. We got a pro skater to come in. We had music, we had giveaways, we had all this stuff. It was just over at lunchtime. And it was just like a celebration to say life's excellent with Jesus. And so I had to get up at assembly to tell my school about the day and what was organised, and then share that message at the end that this whole day is to just let you know that life is excellent with Jesus. And I remember doing that, and I said that, and then literally like all of the people at my school just like laughed at me at assembly. And I was like, oh man, up until that point, I never really thought like this wasn't popular or this wasn't cool. And I was like, I felt like after that moment, I was like, I felt like so like deflated that everyone was like laughing at me, and then people were saying to me stuff at lunchtime and all that kind of stuff after that moment. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. And I felt like really deflated. Anyway, we did that event, and then that Friday night, after we did the event at school, we did a big Friday night rally, and a whole bunch of people from my school came to our youth group on that night and got saved.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, you know what? People laughing at me at assembly, as crushing as that was as a year 8 or 9 student, as deflating as that was worth it. Because on the other side of that, people gave their life to Jesus. People, come and got connected to another local church and youth group. And I'm like, man, I would do that every day of the week. At the time, I felt completely crushed. But I'm like, persecution often leads to other people getting saved. It leads to opportunities. It leads to miracles. It leads to God's power coming into situations that we can't manufacture on our own. And so I think, man, look in the Bible, look at when the disciples were persecuted, it was often the time that the church grew.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, we don't want it, but God always uses it, to continue to build his church.
For sure, yeah. I mean, look at the disciples. Half of them got murdered, beheaded, and so many awful ways of dying.
Yeah.
But I bet you, if you ask them, would you do it again? They would say yes, because what they stood for and they believed in, the thing that back then they were absolutely torn apart for, literally. But now it's saved billions of people. Like, the words that they written are in the most famous book of all time. Their names are in history, and most of their names are like the most used names in history now as well, because of the mark they've left on the world. It's crazy how, and they wouldn't have even seen it then. They would have just been these weird guys that believed in this Jesus, and they would have been absolutely set apart from society and really looked down upon. But they had faith and knew that God is working, and I might not be able to see it now, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And look how many people, like, not only disciples, but every single person in the Bible has left a mark on history. It's crazy how without that, who knows where it would be. It's so cool.
Well, that's the biggest part of their testimony of faith, I reckon, is the fact that many of them died for their faith. Like, if it was a conspiracy that they came up with, we're going to create this story about Jesus, and we're gonna come up with all these miracles that happen, and we're gonna do this and make this whole thing up, then at the point of when you were going to die for it, you'd be like, oh, I'm tapping out. I made the whole thing up. I'm good. But the reason, that is so powerful is because they actually were willing to die for what they said and spoke about and believed in. And to me, that's one of the biggest parts of their story as an evidence of why Jesus is real. And one of the things we can look at, that they weren't just corroborating a conspiracy, they were all willing to die for it because they believed in Jesus, and in their hearts they knew it was true.
Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. I know I was laughing, but we'll see you next week for part 2 of this episode. See ya.